Hey everyone. If you've got questions about ketamine, this next show is for you. I'll be talking to Dr. Reid Robison, the Chief Medical Officer at NovaMind and a board-certified psychiatrist who's been involved in his fair share of ketamine clinical trials. Tune in to learn more. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Dales Report. I'm happy to be joined today by Dr. Reid Robison, the Chief Medical Officer at NovaMind and a board-certified psychiatrist with fellowship training in neurodevelopmental genetics and clinical research. Hi, Dr. Robison. How are you doing today?
Excellent. Thanks. And you can call me Reid.
Sure, I will do that. So Reid co-founded Cedar Psychiatry and Cedar Clinical Research. These are two organizations that were acquired by NovaMind in 2020. And I'm really looking forward to speaking with you more about how these organizations sort of intermingle with one another, some of the work that's going on at NovaMind. And I'll just let our audience know that we actually spoke earlier in the spring for a chapter on ketamine in my upcoming book. So thanks for that. So let's dive in. You've been involved in ketamine clinical trials for a really long time, including as a lead researcher at a site for the study on depression that led to Spravato's recent approval by the FDA. So that's no small feat. Since then, what are some other indications that ketamine is primarily being researched for? And maybe you can mention a few of the indications that you're working on.
Sure, would be happy to. It's a fun topic because I have been working with ketamine for quite some time. The first study I did was for Janssen for treatment-resistant depression. So individuals with major depressive disorder who have say 2 or more failed trials of antidepressant medications, a really difficult to treat condition. And I was really blown away by this rapid antidepressant that we were studying from the anesthesia world. And since then, I've been involved in a number of both ketamine studies and related compounds. We're seeing more and more compounds targeting some of the same mechanisms come down the pipeline, and including some even several years ago that were not successful clinical trials and didn't make it to market. But our interest remains really high in helping the field understand how to use ketamine and psychedelic medicines more broadly in a good way. Like, what are the optimal conditions? What are the safety considerations? Who should and shouldn't get it? But to answer your question, we're doing clinical trials across a wide range of indications right now. Depression, PTSD, treatment-resistant depression, and eating disorders as another indication we're exploring.
So I'm wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on that last one. I think eating disorders are something we don't really hear about too often. There's a lot of attention being given to things like depression, PTSD, but eating disorders is one we don't really hear that often. So tell me a little bit about the research you're doing in that respect. What has been sort of some of the response from people who are receiving this treatment for that indication?
Yeah, and just by way of background, like you pointed out, eating disorders aren't talked about that often, and in my opinion, aren't talked about enough because these are serious mental health conditions. If you look at anorexia nervosa, for example, it has the highest mortality rate of any mental health condition, yet there are zero FDA-approved treatment options for that condition. So it's definitely a passion of mine to try and find new ways of helping individuals who are suffering with eating disorders, including anorexia and others. I was brought on by MAPS, for example, a couple of years ago to help design and implement the protocol for MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for eating disorders. And in that study, it's for anorexia and binge eating disorder. And in the ketamine space, I've been doing clinical trials and pilot projects on eating disorders for several years. I think it started a few years ago when I did a group-based ketamine study in an eating disorder treatment center with groups of 4 individuals who were in 24-hour care in a residential center with a serious eating disorder. And it was such a neat experience for them and for me to witness, because ketamine has this ability to kind of reduce the fear of doing some of this work and get you outside of a stuck place to see things with a new perspective, with fresh eyes, and to, drop back into your body for the first time in a while, which is a big step on the path to recovery from eating disorders. And then since then, we've completed a clinical trial last year of ketamine-assisted psychotherapy for anorexia, and are analyzing that data and looking forward to more towards doing more work. We're planning a psilocybin study for eating disorders later this year. Wow.
So just to make sure I heard you right, you're saying there's no treatment options right now for anyone with anorexia? None at all? That's...
No. Wow. No FDA-approved medication treatment options. Gotcha. There are psychotherapies, and I do want to make sure I acknowledge the really strong work that's been done by the field as a whole in getting to where we're at. There are a number of evidence-based therapy options for individuals, for families, but we still are left with a very difficult to treat condition with serious consequences if current treatments aren't successful, like the psychotherapies or off-label medicines. So yes, there is an urgent need for new ways of approaching it.
Absolutely, and I bet ketamine's ability to sort of help you detach, and like you said, dropping back into your body for someone who has, body dysmorphia, I imagine that's pretty significant. So with so many trials currently going on, focusing on psychedelics, I'm wondering if you could tell our audience a little bit about the trial process. So for example, the difference between the different phases. We hear, phase 1, phase 2A, phase 2B. What are the difference between these phases of studies, and how are people generally recruited for them?
Yeah, these are good questions. And phase 1 studies, you don't hear about or see as much because they're small, early studies with it might be a handful of subjects. It might be healthy normals even to look at safety, pharmacokinetics. How does the medicine behave in humans? But where you hear about studies more lately, especially in psychedelics, are when they get to phase 2 and 3. Phase 2 is, a smaller study to establish initial safety and efficacy, and then phase 3 is the bigger study that's on the path toward approval, and where the stakes are really high in terms of will this drug attain FDA approval or not. That's where MDMA is in the process for PTSD, for example, currently in phase 3, and psilocybin is either, with Usona and Compass, either in or coming out of phase 2, moving towards phase 3.
Okay, so we still have a ways to go.
And then just to round it out.
Sure. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, phase 4 is technically after approval, post-marketing surveillance. Does the medicine continue to be safe? Things like that.
Gotcha. Thank you for clarifying that. That's some important points there. Just because there's so much going on, I think it's important for people to know how to value certain studies, comparing them to one another. So thank you for that. One thing I wanted to ask about, I had mentioned earlier, is Cedar Clinical Research, your research division over at NovaMind. So the company was granted a DEA license to host psilocybin clinical trials back in October. Very exciting. I'm wondering if you can explain the relationship between Cedar Clinical Research and NovaMind to our audience a little bit. What separates Cedar Clinical from other contract research organizations that are looking at psychedelics? I know there's a whole bunch of CROs jumping into this space.
Yeah, I would be happy to. So I've always been a researcher at heart and a clinician. So from the beginning of my career in academics, when I was at the University of Utah, I was doing clinical trials alongside the clinical work. And I think it's always been the ideal approach, in my opinion, or for me at least, to be able to be immersed in the clinical challenges we face in working in mental health, and also have a pulse on what's coming down the pipeline. What are the best ways of diagnosing and assessing mental health conditions. And so at NovaMind, we have research clinics and we have clinics. So where I'm based near Salt Lake City, in one of our locations, we have a large clinic with medication management, talk therapy, ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, transcranial magnetic stimulation, etc. And then across the parking lot is another building where we have a research clinic, and we have roughly half a dozen clinical trials going on at any moment. And these open up new options for our clients. Like if you have treatment-resistant depression, by definition, you have not had success with traditional antidepressants, and depression is a really rough condition to have. So this might open up the possibility of a ketamine or a psilocybin study, or something else that's being explored in the CNS area that we could offer our clients that they wouldn't even have to pay for. Wow. They would get this detailed assessment and get compensation for their time and travel. So for so many different reasons, it's been valuable for our clients and for our clinicians as a whole. So we're just expanding this effort more and more, and we're doing most of our work as a research site for drug developers. Gotcha. But we also do a lot of database studies on our clinical data to help answer some important questions as well.
Okay, awesome. So I imagine it's quite handy having a clinic and a research center in such close proximity. Makes things a little bit more expedited. That is really cool, and definitely something that makes that stand out from other things that we see in the space. I wanted to ask you specifically about a program developed at NovaMind's clinics, through Cedar, emotion-focused ketamine-assisted psychotherapy. So can you explain to our audience what that is, how it's being used, and how it might differ from other programs used in ketamine-assisted psychotherapy?
Sure. So looking back at, say, the last decade of ketamine, from my perspective as a psychiatrist and researcher, my first ketamine study was over 10 years ago, and it was an IV study for treatment-resistant depression. There was no psychotherapy as part of the protocol, and that's how most of the early ketamine studies were. And ketamine happens to have great antidepressant properties that work really quickly in the majority of individuals. It's just not a lasting change for most individuals as well. So it can have an important role in an episode of depression, especially when in crisis or as a bridge to another like psychotherapy or treatment option.
Can you elaborate on that?
Recent years,
sorry to interrupt. I was just wondering if you could elaborate on that a little bit. The usefulness of ketamine in sort of emergency situations, or maybe you could give an example of how it might be used and how it is not sort of equal to or can be exchanged with psilocybin. Just that piece about the fast acting. Yeah, if you could elaborate a little bit. Thanks.
Yeah, I'll give you an example of when I first used ketamine, even outside of studies. When I first started working with it clinically, I was the head of a psych consult service at a big hospital in Utah. It's Intermountain Medical Center, the biggest hospital in the state. And I'd start the day in the ER, seeing folks who were there in crisis and doing psych consults, essentially, then kind of make my way up the hospital floors to the ICUs, the neurology floor, the medicine floor, the surgical floor. Anyone with serious psych concerns or needs during their stay. And I had never used ketamine for mental health purposes previously. This is back in maybe 2010.
Okay.
But I happened to be in a setting where it was very medically supported. So when I had individuals say they were in the hospital after a suicide attempt, an overdose, for example, and they were still deeply depressed and suffering, struggling, the data had been coming out showing the antidepressant properties of ketamine, where it would kick in not within weeks, but within hours. Okay. And so I asked my colleagues, like in the ER, the medical floors, the ICU, what do you think of this crazy idea? Could we use ketamine for our shared client? Oh. Thinking they'd be like, that's not approved for that use, or no way. They're like, of course, yeah, we could do that today. Ketamine is well known to us. It's used millions of times out there in anesthesia and even carried on ambulances or by backpack medics. So together, it was a great situation to be able to use it, and we were able to help a number of individuals when in the throes of depression, while at rock bottom, to feel better quickly, to be able to put some other pieces of their treatment plan in place, like whether it's while waiting to start a traditional medicine or get plugged in with a therapist or both, or to get back on their feet in some way. And since then, fast forward until 2019, S-ketamine, or Spravato, was approved by the FDA for treatment-resistant depression, and it happened to be the first formal approval of a rapid antidepressant, because our options before that would take sometimes weeks to work, if they even did.
Wow, that's huge. So you were definitely on the cusp of that, of using it in that way, I guess. Very cool. Thank you for that. Those details. Just to jump back, I just want to know a little bit more about the emotion-focused ketamine-assisted psychotherapy program. Mm-hmm. Thanks.
Yeah. So, thanks for getting us back on track, because that's another fun question. So since that time, when in the early days of ketamine in psychiatry, we were just using it as a medicine. It still has a use there, but it also happens to be, in my opinion, a great psychedelic medicine that can be a therapy accelerator. And so in recent years, I've just become more and more interested in how do we pair it with therapy in the best possible way for various conditions. And you see more and more of this work coming out, out of New York. There's some ketamine plus therapy for substance use disorders,
Gosh, yeah.
Like by Elias Dakwar and colleagues. And we're actually starting one of those studies here in Utah as well, with the University of Utah, looking at a mindfulness-oriented therapy plus ketamine for opiate use disorder. But on the emotion-focused ketamine question, a couple of years ago, I teamed up with a colleague in the eating disorder field, Adele LaFrance, and we, who comes from the emotion-focused therapy world. She had developed a specific emotion-focused family therapy for eating disorders, and I've had training in emotion-focused therapy as well, and of course in ketamine work. So we developed and tested a specific way of approaching the therapy paired with ketamine for eating disorders, and that led to a formal open label clinical trial of EF-KAP for anorexia. So emotion-focused ketamine-assisted psychotherapy draws on the emotion-focused therapy principles that are evidence-based and well-established for a number of conditions, depression, anxiety, and certain kind of eating disorder symptoms as well. And then we bring everything we know from experience in the research on ketamine and ketamine-assisted psychotherapy in general, and then put it together in a specific protocol of working through a healing and recovery process with clients using ketamine sessions, every week for 3 weeks, and pairing it with therapy and integration sessions before and after, targeting the eating disorder in particular. And we've also developed depression protocols for emotion-focused ketamine-assisted psychotherapy because, I believe we're entering this time now of, it's time to get specific about, what are the best evidence-based ways of using ketamine plus therapy for different conditions, because it's not a one-size-fits-all approach.
Totally. I hear you on that. Thank you. It's great, to hear that how things have changed, that this started out as something that was used without any therapy, without any integration. And now it seems like it's an integral piece. Like nobody talks about psychedelic use in this context without the therapy piece. So I think that's definitely a good thing to see. And I imagine very critical to your clients as well. One last question I wanted to ask for you that's a little bit more general. What can you tell us about NovaMind's plans for 2022? I know that you recently acquired some clinics in Arizona. If I'm not mistaken, you also have a few clinics that focus on particular indications, like you just mentioned, including substance use. Are there some more plans for this in the coming year? What can you sort of tell us without giving away too much?
Sure. Yeah, 2022 is going to be an exciting year for psychedelic medicine and for us at NovaMind. If a pivotal year, even perhaps with medicines like MDMA that may even attain FDA approval before the year's over. But at NovaMind, yes, we did announce a formal acquisition of clinics in Arizona. So this is our first out of Utah expansion. And within Utah, we're still working on some of these clinics that we've announced, like in Park City. It's not open yet, but we have not just a clinic, but a hybrid clinic retreat model coming soon, where individuals, families, groups can fly in for a course of say psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy or non-medicine intensive psychotherapy preparation, integration, or other work. So that's an exciting project. We're working on a number of studies, psychedelic clinical trials that we've mentioned, both sponsored ones from drug developers and then specific explorations of the psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy with our expertise internally, and more work on exploring our data to help answer some of these important questions of the field. But it's going to be a really exciting year ahead.
Great. Well, that's definitely what I've heard from a lot of other people in the space as well, that 2022 is going to be a big, important year, and definitely crossing my fingers on the MDMA approval. Thank you so much for providing us with that update. I would be so thrilled to have you on the show again in the future to learn more about what's going on at NovaMind. But thank you so much, and wishing you a great rest of the day, Reid.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to chat.